It is really a great privilege to be here this morning. Last Sunday morning, I preached at Eastridge congregation once a year. They have a program called, what do they call it now again? Sorry. Focus on the Family. It's a congregation that's nestled in Mitchell's Plain, and it's a very tough community to work in. And I have so much respect for Mervyn and also for the preachers that work in that area because it is very tough. The economy is very strained, and also crime and violence is very much at the epitome of life. And it's a very difficult community to work in. And my lesson for that day was to ask the question, are you building your family after God's design? And so what I did was I take the same core thoughts from there, and I'm going to ask you the same question this morning. What is your commitment to your family? Your commitment to your family, is it great? Would you say that it is on a scale from 1 to 10? Would you say that it is exceptional? Or would you say that, Dereck, you know what, there's so many pressures in this world that often detracts from the core of my life, and I would love to be a better father, a better mother, but it's very, very hard. And so this morning, I want you to kick back. I don't want you to sit down and say, oh, you come at no. And say, well, I'm obviously a bad person and so on. Just relax. We're all human beings, and we're all on our way to do things according to God's will. And so what this lesson is aimed at is to help us all just regather some of the incredible thoughts of God's Word that'll help us just to refocus, help us just relook and recalibrate. And so again, just say, I want to be a great mom. I want to be a great dad. I'm very mindful that we live in a world where we have single parents due to very difficult circumstances. And so I want to salute you today and say that I've got so much respect and honor for you, for what you're doing. In the first place, I want to say this to you, that if you ask the question, what is God? You might want to ask the question and read a lot about the nature of God. But as you read through the book, you'll need to read a lot of the text to come up with a conclusion that God actually is a very social God. You pick it up right in the beginning where God says, and he has a discussion with the Godhead and says, let us. And it's a wonderful picture of relationship that God has. And it's interesting that God also, in all of his wisdom, would place us in a relational environment where we belong to the church and we belong to family that is their father as God, and Jesus Christ is their redeemer and brother and fellow heir. And so it's an amazing thing for you to have a look at and just to understand that at the core of God, he wants togetherness. He wants family. It's interesting if you read, I think, through the book of Proverbs, you will find that God places the lost, he places them in families. In other words, when you are struggling in your faith, God places you where you can be nestled and nurtured again. There are two things I want to just say about God. And there's a wonderful book I read, and you cannot get in this country. I had it brought from the States. I'm not quite sure if Oscar brought it for me, but I was so grateful for the book, written by a man called Gene Getz, which says, The Relational God. And it's a massive volume that deals with the true nature of God in a very abstract way, but yet incredibly deep way. I want to just take two thoughts from that book. And the first is that the entire Bible is about helping us to live a right relationship with God and with one another. The teachings of Jesus Christ, if you read through them and you sift them, will say the following, that we must have a right relationship with a Father in heaven, a right relationship with each other, a right relationship with our spouse, a right relationship with our children, with our employers, with government, and even a right relationship with our enemies. So, in all of these relational areas of our lives, God has touched on it, which is crucial. Oh, sorry, that was a bit heavy, huh? The idea here is that God wants us to be functional people, not associative people that don't know how to relate. He wants us to relate, but he says, I want those relationships to be in such a way that it will be wholesome, that it will be uplifting and upbuilding. It's no surprise that Jesus Christ would make a comment way back when on the Mount of Transfiguration, I think it's in Matthew 17, the disciples are together, and God says to Jesus Christ, he says, and he sees Elijah, and he sees Moses there, and he says, listen to him. He speaks about Jesus Christ. And he says, if everybody else you want to listen to, don't listen to everybody else. And those two men represented the law and the prophets. And he speaks about Jesus Christ, and God affirms him and says that he is the one that God approves of. He says, I'm pleased. This is my son. Listen to him. No surprise, Jesus would later on say that I am the truth, the life, and the way. And by implication, what Jesus Christ is saying, not arrogantly so, but by the authority that comes from his Father, that beside me, there is no truth. And what Jesus is saying, that in what I'm saying is absolute. I was talking to a preacher this week, and one of the comments I made to him, what I fear about Jesus Christ is not so much what he said. What I fear about Jesus is not so much that what Jesus Christ, by implication, just a simple comment, when we talk about hell, 13 times mentioned, 11 times by Jesus Christ, what I fear about him is his economy of words. Because he says enough that you can understand. He says enough to give you life. But he says enough that one day you cannot stand before the throne of God and make an argument that you did not tell me. In the second place, Jesus Christ demands right relationships, demand priorities. You know the quote that I've quoted so many times. Put first things first. Because if you put second things first, you will lose both first and second things. Learn how to have right priorities. It is ironic, you will find in 1 Timothy chapter 3 that one of the qualities of an elder is that he's a man that can clearly govern his family on priorities that are spiritually centered. The mark of a man that cannot be an elder is a man that cannot have first spiritual priorities. We have a lot of unhappy families around, and many of them is not due to themselves. But those where they can be held accountable is that they've lost sight on what is important. They've lost sight that keeping your eyes on what is important, that is your guiding light, that takes you places despite where you are, so that when you look at your life, you can say, I'm going and I'm following Jesus Christ. I know where this will end, and this is where I'm taking my family. Every one of us needs a compass. Every one of us needs a compass in your life, and I want to ask you a question. What is your compass? Let me tell you one of my compasses. Since I became a Christian, I, by God's grace, have never missed a worship service unless I'm very sick. I worked in the secular world, so that's I'm very familiar with those demands. But I never missed worship. I would arrive here at about 10, 20 past 7. My wife would pick me up, and I would not have eaten dinner because I'd be at worship that evening. I'd be at worship that evening. The same for Wednesday nights. And the reason I'm saying this is that you and I need to have the right priorities. There's a story mentioned about a needle of a compass. You can bump it, you can turn it upside down, you can stand it on its side, but its needle will always point to the north. Interesting story I read many, many years ago about a nuclear submarine was that a nuclear submarine has the capacity and capability to stay underwater, subsurface, for up to 1 year. But one of the mariners mentioned in an interview, they said to him, why don't you? He says, every 31 days, we need to come up to the surface, even if it is just for a moment. We have to come up, and we need to calibrate all our instruments to the North Star. Because he says, it is so needed that if we are off even 1 degree, we would land where we did not plan to be. And the reason I'm telling you this is that my question is for you and I, do you in fact calibrate yourself? Or is it just humdrum 1 week into the next, don't care, Sunday mornings is golf day, or the new golf is now riding the bicycle, and it's all fine and it's all good, provided you provide for that moment to recalibrate. It's interesting that Jesus Christ, in the discussion with the Pharisees, they would ask him, they would say to him, what is the greatest of the commands? And Jesus Christ would respond to them. Jesus was no fool, and he knew when they tried to trick him. He was a master because he wrote the scriptures. He was there when it was being written. It was written for him. And Jesus Christ would say, the command of God is very simply that you must have no other gods before me. Jesus Christ said, love the God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And it will be obvious that he would say to you and I that we must love God with all our resources, all our mental capacity, all our spiritual direction is toward God. No power, nothing else we are dependent on except him. It's quite interesting in John chapter 4 verse 12 where Jesus Christ would say that God empowers us not only to be good people and to be exceptional examples in this world, but he also empowers us to be God's children. That's why in John chapter 4 verse 12 he says to those who believe, he gives the power to become sons of God, and he empowers us to have the right kind of husband, wife, parent, and grandparent. So the question is again, if I want to be an exceptional mom, an exceptional dad, an exceptional grandparent, an incredible husband, God's asking you, can I be just that? Even within my limitations. And Jesus Christ would say to you, yes. Yes, you can. Yes, you are able to be an incredible person, provided you look at a few things. If it is true that God wants us to have good relationships, surely as the author of this entire world, he would be able to give us the direction to get where we need to be. It is interesting to note that in most unhappy families you will find that God's not plugged in at all, that he's not even part of the equation. He can, if we really give him the position of honor. The second priority you must understand, it's not your child, but it is your spouse. And so often we find that when Paul speaks to the church in Ephesians chapter 5, he says the following: men must love their wife as Christ loved the church. The wife must love and appreciate her husband as the church does for Jesus Christ. Men, there is nothing else more important than a good relationship with your wife, just below God. It's not your children. It's not your job. It's not your hobbies, not even yourself. And that is something that we often struggle with. And sometimes we struggle with it because really and truly living directionally toward our spouse and intentionally and relationally toward them is sometimes hard because they are just bullheaded, whoever they are. Many years ago, McGill University did an incredible study. And I'm just going to read a short extract from that, or rather just refer to it. A study was done with the first study was done in 1955 to 1958, and the second follow-up was done from 58 to 64. In total, about 330 families were polled during that time. And what they discovered was in those families, the one specific factor that kept that family together and kept it stable was the relationship between the father and the mother. There was a good relationship between them. They found out, and I'm just going to read part of the summary. The sample is drawn from families of first-year McGill universities that are native-born, of English Protestant background, resident in Montreal. It was done in Canada. All the families studied are intact, with both parents living, no divorce or remarriage at the time of the study. The capsule description of these families summarize their socioeconomic class, which is mostly middle class, well-educated, moderately prosperous, responsible, relatively settled in their ways, and moderate in their views. And the reason I'm telling you this is that even today, social studies affirm a 2,000-year-old document that speaks to the heart in 2014. It tells you that God's word is not only true, it's not only relevant. Jesus Christ speaks to us not only because he is prominent in history, but because he is preeminent when it comes to the lives of people. You and I either believe it and submit to it and do it, and feel the goodness that comes from it, that's affirmed by study, or we walk away and say it's a lot of hogwash. God would say to you, you must love your wife after me. And the best thing a man can do for his children is to love his wife, and a wife to respect her husband. Priority number 3 is our children. God meant for children to bring happiness into our homes, but sometimes just the opposite is true. I think a lot of unhappiness begins when we fail to take responsibility for raising our own children. There's a side of me that really struggles at the moment with this entire thinking. And let me tell you where I am with regarding to this, is that in today's day and age, we find that God continually is being withdrawn and pulled out of the public sector, in fact, out of schools, most of it. I served this other day, the other Monday morning, with an incredible school, and I want to mention their name. It's Aristia Primary School, and Joyce is a wonderful teacher in that school, and they've got an incredible principal there, Mr. Boshoff. And Mr. Boshoff and I, sorry, my brain is running on other stuff at the moment. Mr. Boshoff and I had a quick chat after that, and I said to him, as the principal of the school, what are the difficulties that you have? And he made a comment and he said, Dereck, let me be very clear where I stand regarding this. I run a Christian school, and its character and nature will not change, not for anyone. And this is key for me, is that it comes down to a man who leads an incredible staff. I've had pleasure of spending time with them in their tea room and talking to many of the teachers. What an amazing bunch of people. But you find that God is at the center of that school. You watch the discipline. Every time you walk past a child, it's like you have, you start to go into shocks with more money, and you're trying to greet all the kids because every one of them are just so incredibly well-mannered. Let me say something to you today. As incredible as that school is, God has not delegated the spiritual nurturing to a school. They are there to augment what you and I have already established within our children. They are to carry out and embed that within society. But the primary growth of that will be from you and I. When you and I emulate Jesus Christ in the way that we treat our spouses, in the way that we do our business, in the way that we conduct our spiritual lives, so that that will extend and influence the environment wherein God has placed them. Fathers, mothers, and grandmothers know this, that you need to take responsibility for helping nurture the children. I want to stop just for a moment, and I did not mean to say this. Rachel and many of the Sunday school, my wife and many others, and Anna Marie and Jean Strumpf and many other folk, you have my absolute respect and admiration. And let me tell you why. Because you take accountability and you step into that space to provide a nurturing bed for children to hear about Jesus, to encourage them to relationally function in a spiritual environment. And that for me is superb. And absolutely, we have not even begun to quantify what the effect of that is on our society. The fourth priority is our vocation. 1 Timothy chapter 5 will tell us that if a man who will not provide for his family is worse than an infidel, an unbeliever. There is no doubt that to today's day and age, really trying to feed your family is difficult for a man alone in our family. Our society has definitely pushed where the wife has to work if we want to live a relatively good life. And many of our wives don't do that out of choice, but out of necessity. And so we completely accept that there are going to be factors that are going to influence us where we are. But this is key. We must never allow that one specific command from God to completely cloud and crowd out our family. The other evening, and I wish you would come to Sunday evening sermons, we have some incredible young men that I have so much respect for. I watch these men growing and I listen to their lessons. And there are times when I sit down and I feel I want to cry in my heart. A young man, and I won't mention his name, did a lesson the other night. Pity we didn't record it. But he spoke with deep sadness that he works an 80-hour week. Many of us can't wait to get out of the office by 4 o'clock. But this man pushes long hours away from his home. He leaves this evening at 6 o'clock for Joburg again, and then he's away from them. Many of us who work long hours knows what 80 hours feels like. But we also know that whatever you say yes to, you have to say no to something else. By God's grace, let it never be your family. May saying no to that which crowds out your vocation never be your wife or your children. What I lamented, and I want to just say, I have so much love for you young guys. You made a comment, he missed his first daughter's steps, and he saw it on Facebook. His wife recorded. He could see his daughter walking for the first time. I was privileged as a father who worked those kind of hours. And those years were a little bit different to today. And I tell you something, I saw both my kids walk their first steps. Not only walk their first steps, but Victoria, the first day she learned how to swim. And I taught my son how to swim. The reason I'm telling you this is that our society will push and push and push until they have even crushed your soul. But I want to speak to us as men. Do not let them get to your family. If they touch your family, you need to fight back. Even if it means disconnecting anything that wars to grab your time. Switch off the television. Don't go to your computer at night. Don't answer emails after a certain time. And I know it's almost impossible. Some of us sit till 10, 11 o'clock trying to answer, and it's not social emails. These are crucial emails. But the reason I'm saying, know this. Firstly, God. Second, wife. Thirdly, fourthly, is your children. Thirdly, children, and fourthly, is your vocation. Your job on this earth is not to climb a corporate ladder. Your job on this earth is not to make money. It's incidental. It's not core. Maybe today you're saying to yourself, Dereck, this is hard. I encourage you to call a family conference like I did with my children. And I said to them, what is it that you need from me? I was probably in my second year of a master's in Greek. And my daughter said to me, Dad, I don't see you. And I was working hard. And I said to my daughter, whatever you need, I will do for you. And the reason I'm telling you this is not to make her feel guilty. I thank God for her because she reminded me of what is important. That today I have no qualms to say no for that which is not core to what God has called me to do. And maybe tonight you should have them speak freely and say, Dad, we need you more. Dad, is there any way that you can adjust? Because I love you and I want to spend time with you. Many of us here today have regrets. And many of it is not sin and stuff and rubbish and theft and rubbish like that. But it's not giving time to our children. Don't let it be you. The idea is that Christ says to us, I want you to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And if it means that God wants me to be the first to move, let it be. Let me not wait for my wife or my children. Let it be me. Jesus is our example. And I tell you something, when I look at this man, every time I read the text, and I've read it more times than I not care to remember that I can remember. But Jesus had a very strong sense of identity. Do not allow money to be your identity. Because trust me, when God takes that away, the question on the table is, who will you be? Jesus was in the upper room, and the atmosphere was electric. And Jesus Christ said these words. He made a comment, and it's a beautiful text. In chapter 13, verse 1 of the book of John, he says it was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And the idea I want you to see here is that Jesus Christ himself wanted to show people the full extent of his love. The full extent of our love is not bringing home the bacon and sitting smugly, enjoy the bacon. But it's to serve them in a real way. Be there for your wife when she wakes up with a cup of coffee. Be there for your children when you're working on your computer, and switch the thing off and say, what is it that you need from me? So that ultimately you serve them at their greatest need. In verse 3, Jesus Christ says he knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Watch the strong sense of knowing who he is. And sometimes we've got an identity crisis. And wherever the world says, kry die, we're after that. Because therein lies my identity. He says his identity lay clearly from who was his Father. Knew that when he dies, he'll be with his Father. And so with that confidence and strong identity, he gets to his knees and he washes feet. The idea here is, brethren, we sometimes wait for our spouse to make the first move. What if they push me away? What if she says, well, it's by time that you wash my feet? So what? Jesus Christ picks up the Hey, Ben. Takes up the wash basin and he washes their feet. Listen closely. Do you love your wife? Do you love your children? Serve them. Spend time with them. Ask them, are you okay? How are you doing? Fathers, maybe your children are not in this country. Book a Skype session with your son or your daughter once a week. Not even once a week, but maybe twice a week. And even if it's for 15 minutes. How are you, my boy? How are you doing? Are you well? I wanted to know that you're okay, that your mom and I miss you. And we're thinking of you. How are things going at the moment? God has given us ways to overcome these things. Let's do it. The first thing that a servant must be, he must know who they are. We dealt with that. Secondly, a servant must always have an I'll go first attitude. Doesn't matter if they say, well, it's about time that you did it. And you know what you say to your wife? You are right, my angel. And don't say, and you go next. Just say, you are right. And then you go first. You know what? Jesus Christ came first. Jesus Christ says, I'll show you how to serve. How many of our men and our children don't know how to serve? I had a stepdad that was a very difficult man. But boy, he loved my mom. Every day when she got in the afternoons, he would go and he'd fetch her slippers. And he'd go and fetch her from the car. And he'd give her a hug and he said, I missed you. I missed you. And he would speak to her. And she'd walk inside. She won't even speak to everybody else. But he'd change her shoes. And he'd say, you had a heavy day. How was your day? And my mom and him would talk and I would hear that from my room. And he would say, I thought of you the entire day. What a wonderful thing for your wife to hear. Or even your husband to hear. I'm looking forward to my feet being rubbed, but we mustn't hold our breath, I think. Sorry, my wife's not here, so, but she, you know. Jesus Christ said, do likewise. Do it for each other. Do the same. Thirdly, servants are ready to serve anybody at any time. Sometimes, brethren, we really struggle to make time Ladies, are you ever tired of cooking a meal? Of rocking your baby? Of taking care of the nappies or cleaning the house? Some women will say yes, and actually the right answer is no. But you know what makes it so worth is that when somebody or the children say, Mom, that was a great meal. Thank you for the effort you put into it. Saturday night, my wife made a curry. I brought the curry from Durban, and I said to her, you need to test drive this stuff, love. So she test drove it. I tell you something, it knocked me out the park. Burnt like crazy, but it was nice. But I tell you something, I said to her, you know what? You really work for me. She made a great meal. Servants don't care who gets the credit. And so often we want to say, I did it. Doesn't matter. God gets all the credit. And that's all that matters. I know that some of us will not serve at home or at church because we feel that niemand sê dankie nie. But please, do it anyway. Servants, don't keep score. I did it the last time, now it's your turn. Don't do that. Just consider it an honor to do it again and again. Serving and blessing. Servants, don't play martyr. Arme ek. Ek werk my vingers tot die been en is dit die manier hoe ek behandel word. Don't do that. Many of us work 7 days a week, 21 days in a row. But we do it because we love. And that's the reason we do it. Don't do that. You will break any kind of sweat equity that you've put in. Don't do it. I was going to sing a song for you here, but thankfully we haven't got time for that. It's Make Me a Servant, Lord, that wonderful song. And the last thing I want to just say to you this morning, and just only 3 thoughts. Brethren, we live in an environment that truly we have been blessed. I've never seen my mom drunk at 9 o'clock in the morning. I've never seen my dad hit my mom. But we're living in a society where that's become commonplace. I've never seen that kind of behavior. But last weekend I sat in a meeting where people spoke about a community that is in so much pressure. It's hard for children to even function at school when those things happen. And then we ask the question, how are we going to change all this? We acknowledge all of that. But you know what? We need to be the kind of catalyst that Jesus can use as the instruments to help and to turn this all around. When I listened, and I listened intently, I said, I'm in. The first thing I want to say, what do I do and say to a family that is fragmented? First thing, be willing to admit that you need help. Be willing to say that, God, you must help me, because I've tried whatever it is. And maybe today you want to seek the help and counsel of the elders, of folk that are very capable, like Celia, and people that are willing to help, like Gavin, with marriages. Find a family that can mentor you if you're under pressure, that will hold those secrets that you struggle with sacrosanct to them. Secondly, I want to say this to you. Today you may be struggling and you're saying, I can't even go there. I want to say to you this, never give up. Never give up on God, that He can change. Never give up on God, that there can be good relationships in the future, that God Himself will set across your path. Luke 18:27 says, what's impossible for man is possible with God. That's Jonathan's favorite one that says, I think it's Matthew 10:27, I think it is. Mark 10:27. Nothing's impossible with God. And then Ephesians 3:20 says, God is able to do immeasurably abundantly more than we all could have asked for or imagined, according to His power that is at work in us right now. And thirdly, don't be afraid to admit when you are wrong. And I know many times we feel that it is hard. Many times we feel that if I give my wife or my husband that hold that I've said I'm sorry, he will expect it every time. There is nothing more healing than saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hurting you. There's nothing more healing than restoring the dignity and integrity of people that you've hurt, especially in a relationship. There's nothing more redeeming to say, I was insensitive. I should have thought before I said, and I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And so this morning, maybe you are sitting at a stage of your life and only God knows where you are. But I pray that if it is one of those that you say, I want to give my life to God today, I'm ready. And maybe today you're saying, Lord, I've withheld part of my life to you. Where there's part of my life that there was no mastery in your economy over my life. I am sorry. And maybe today you want to sit with an elder and say, I want to talk to you, man. I need your help. I need you to walk with my family. I need you to help us. And I want to say to you, teach me to love. Whatever place you're at, I pray that God will strengthen you and that today would have been of great help for you.